The hush that fell over the Langford room was heavy enough to stop a heartbeat. Every fork paused midair. The pianist's hands hovered above the keys, his melody frozen. At the center of the silence stood Martha, gray streaks of hair escaping from her neat bun, her hands trembling slightly as she held up a black card that glimmered under the chandelier. Across the room, a man in a navy suit leaned back in his chair, phone raised as if this were a performance he'd planned. His expression was cool, amused, the look of someone who owned too much of the world to be questioned by it. "I'm afraid I must have left my card at home," he said, voice low but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "Let's see how you handle that." Martha blinked once, her breath steadying. For 15 years she had served men like him, lawyers, politicians, CEOs, men who measured worth in digits and metal, never in decency. She smiled politely. "We all forget something, sir." Her voice carried warmth that didn't match the chill in the air. He lifted his phone a little higher, recording. "Do I?" "Yes," she said softly. "But kindness remembers." The corner of his mouth twitched, half smirk, half disbelief. The other guests watched in stunned fascination. They expected her to falter, to beg the manager for help, to blush with embarrassment. Instead, she reached calmly into her apron pocket, pulled out a plain silver card, her own debit card, and placed it on the tray. "If it makes your evening easier, I'll cover it," she said. "Consider it on the house." Someone gasped. A waiter froze by the wine rack. The billionaire lowered his phone. His smirk faded, replaced by something unreadable, a man realizing the mirror he'd held up for her had turned back on him. Martha turned toward the register, her shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. The chandelier's light caught her uniform buttons, tiny stars glinting on black fabric. She felt no shame, only a quiet certainty that she'd done the right thing. Behind her, the man's voice dropped, stripped of arrogance. "Wait." She stopped, glancing back over her shoulder. "You'd really pay for me?" Martha studied him, the face of a man who'd never heard no without strings attached. "I'd pay for the coffee," she said. "The lesson is free." A murmur rippled through the restaurant, disbelief, admiration, something between the two. The billionaire exhaled, his posture softening. For a fleeting moment, the room didn't see wealth and labor. It saw two people, one humbled, one steady. Martha handed the receipt to the hostess, scribbling a note on the corner before placing it in the tray beside his glass. When the man picked it up, his eyes lingered on her handwriting. "Kindness has no credit limit." The pianist resumed playing, slow and low. Conversation rose again, fragile but alive. And in that quiet hum of silverware and soft music, a man worth billions sat speechless, realizing that the richest person in the room had just walked away in a waitress's shoes. For the rest of the night, the restaurant hummed with the uneasy rhythm of whispered conversations. The chandelier's crystals scattered soft gold light across the polished tables, but every now and then someone would glance toward table 12, where the billionaire still sat, his untouched espresso cooling by the minute. Martha avoided looking his way. She wiped down the counter, folded napkins, refilled water glasses, all with the same steady patience she had built over decades of quiet endurance. Her co-workers threw her quick, anxious looks. One of them, a young waiter named Caleb, leaned close and whispered, "You really used your own card, didn't you?" She nodded once, her voice low. Sometimes dignity costs a swipe. He didn't know what to say after that. From the corner of her eye, she saw the man stand. He adjusted his cufflinks, gathered his phone, and slipped on a charcoal overcoat that shimmered faintly under the lights. He didn't look angry. He looked lost, a man who'd walked into his own reflection and didn't quite know what to do with it. He paused by the counter where Martha stood. The room quieted again, as if everyone had been holding their breath for this moment. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know. Do you even know who I am?" Martha finally looked up, her expression calm. "A customer," she said. "One who forgot his card." For a second he almost smiled. Then he slipped something from his pocket, a sleek obsidian black business card. "Lawrence Vane," he said. "Vane Capital." The name meant little to her, but several guests nearby gasped. He was the kind of man whose decisions built or broke cities. Martha only nodded. "Good evening, Mr. Vane." He studied her like she was an equation that refused to solve. "You didn't flinch," he said, half to himself. "You didn't get defensive, didn't try to prove anything. Arson, proving something," she said softly, "is for people still trying to remember who they are." For the first time that night, Lawrence had no reply. He left the card on the counter, the black surface catching a streak of amber light. "Keep it," he said. "Maybe one day you'll need a favor." She slid it back toward him. "No need. My bills get paid the same way everyone's do, one honest shift at a time." He gave a short nod, as if she had just given him an answer he hadn't realized he'd been asking for. Then he walked out into the New York cold. The door closed softly behind him, leaving a faint echo that lingered longer than it should have. When the last customer left, Martha sat in the empty booth near the window, untying her apron. Her feet ached, but her mind was strangely quiet. Outside, the city glowed, taxis gliding through puddles of light, steam rising from grates. She wondered if the man was still out there, replaying the moment the world had gone silent on him. 2 days later, the manager called her into the office. He looked nervous, holding a printed email. "It's from someone named Lawrence Vane," he said. Martha waited. "He's donating a retirement fund for you." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. The manager continued. He said, "She reminded me that worth isn't a number, it's a choice." Martha didn't know what to say. The idea of money she hadn't earned made her uncomfortable. But the thought that a man like him had felt compelled to rethink his own wealth, that was something she could accept. That evening, the Langford room buzzed louder than usual. A journalist had caught wind of the story. Cameras waited outside, eager for a glimpse of the waitress who'd humbled a billionaire. Martha ignored them. She wiped down tables, refilled glasses, greeted guests as always. Only when she turned toward the door did she pause. Lawrence Vane was there again, without entourage or phone. He looked almost ordinary now, his confidence tempered by something gentler. He approached slowly. "I came to settle a bill," he said. "You already did," Martha replied. "Not the one I meant." He set a small envelope on the table. "It's not money, just something that belongs to someone who remembers." And inside was a simple note written in clean, deliberate handwriting. "Every empire I built started with debt, but that night I learned what I owe can't be paid in dollars." Martha folded the paper carefully. "You didn't owe me anything." "I disagree," he said quietly. "You owed me the mirror I needed." He stayed for coffee, this time paying in cash. They spoke briefly about ordinary things, the weather, the music, her granddaughter's college plans. When he left, he didn't record anything. No photos, no staged gestures, just a handshake that felt human. After he was gone, Martha stood for a long moment watching the chandelier scatter light across the tables. She realized the room no longer felt like someone else's world. It was just a place where people came hungry for food, for meaning, for small reminders of decency. She gathered her things, stepped into the cold night, and looked up at the skyline glowing like a river of glass. Somewhere out there, a man with endless wealth was learning the first real value he couldn't measure. She smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "No limit indeed." Morning sunlight spilled through the narrow blinds of Martha's small kitchen, painting soft gold stripes across the worn countertop. The coffee machine sputtered, filling the air with the smell of roast and the hum of a day beginning. She moved slowly, her joints stiff, but her spirit light. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: ease. Her granddaughter Lily came shuffling into the room wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big. "Grandma," she said, eyes half open, "someone dropped this off for you." She handed over a thick white envelope, the return address embossed with the words Vane Foundation. Martha opened it cautiously. Inside were 2 things, a letter and a document. The letter was handwritten in a clean, deliberate script. "You once said kindness has no credit limit. I decided to test that theory. Enclosed is a scholarship for Lily Martinez, fully funded through graduation. I hope she studies whatever reminds her of you. Lawrence Vane. Her breath caught. The second sheet was indeed a scholarship certificate in Lily's name, complete with the university seal. She blinked hard, as if the letters might vanish if she stared too long. Lily leaned closer. Is it real? It's real, sweetheart, Martha said softly, but it's not a gift. It's a ripple. That afternoon the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews, talk shows wanted her story. The manager from the Langford room kept asking if she'd like to give a statement. Martha declined them all. She had no interest in fame. Her story wasn't about humiliation or victory. It was about remembering that grace still existed in a world obsessed with price tags. Still, the story wouldn't die. By evening, her picture was on local news stations. Waitress teaches billionaire a priceless lesson. Friends from years ago called to congratulate her. Some said she was brave. Others said she was lucky. Martha just smiled and said, "No, I was simply doing my job." When she returned to work the next night, the atmosphere was different. Patrons smiled warmly. Waiters straightened their posture around her. Even the head chef softened his usual bark. The chandelier seemed to shine a little kinder. As she moved through the room, she caught sight of a familiar figure at table 12. Lawrence sat alone. No phone, no entourage, just a cup of black coffee in front of him. He rose when she approached. "I was hoping you'd be here," he said. "I always am," she replied with a hint of humor. He gestured toward the seat across from him. "Would you join me for a minute?" Martha hesitated but sat down. "I thought billionaires didn't repeat restaurants," she teased. "I don't," he said, "unless the meal came with a lesson I couldn't digest in one sitting." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. The clinking of dishes and the soft murmur of diners filled the space around them. Finally, Lawrence spoke. "You know, I built companies on efficiency, algorithms, cost-cutting, but no formula ever included empathy. You gave me something that can't be scaled." Martha smiled faintly. "Empathy doesn't grow from logic. It grows from pause." "Pause?" he echoed. "Yes," she said. "The moment when everything stops, the music, the chatter, the rush, that's where you find yourself." He leaned back, studying her with quiet admiration. "Do you ever get tired of being kind?" "Every day," she admitted. "But I do it anyway, because someone has to keep the lights on in this world." They both laughed softly, and for the first time, Lawrence looked less like a man made of numbers and more like someone trying to be human. Later, when Martha returned home, she found another envelope slipped under her door. This one was plain, unmarked. Inside was a small metal plaque engraved with a single phrase, "Dignity is the last currency that never loses value." She placed it on her shelf beside framed photos of Lily, a few old postcards from her late husband, and the well-worn Bibles she'd inherited from her mother. For once, her little apartment didn't feel small. It felt earned. Weeks passed. The frenzy around the story faded, replaced by newer headlines. But the impact lingered quietly. Patrons at the Langford room began tipping more generously. The staff pooled a portion of their earnings each month to start a kindness fund for co-workers in need. Martha noticed that even the chef began thanking his team at the end of shifts. Something had shifted in that room, an invisible current of humility threading through every corner. One night, as she locked up, she glanced at the reflection of the chandelier in the window. The light sparkled, softer than before. She thought about Lawrence somewhere in his glass office, perhaps pausing before a decision, remembering a woman who had dared to teach him without saying a single cruel word. Martha whispered, "Maybe that's enough." Outside, the street was alive with the rhythm of the city horns, laughter, footsteps. She pulled her coat tighter and stepped into the cold, her breath forming small clouds that disappeared into the night. Above her, the skyline glowed like scattered stars. There was no music, no applause, just the steady pulse of her heart and the quiet comfort of knowing that sometimes, In a world obsessed with limits, the truest wealth is found in the act of giving without counting. And as she disappeared down the sidewalk, the echo of her words lingered in the night air, soft, steady, unshakable. Every card has a limit. Only character doesn't. A few months passed before Martha saw him again. Spring had crept into the city, thawing the frost that clung to the windows of the Langford room. The streets outside were lined with blooming magnolias, and the air smelled faintly of rain and roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. Inside, business carried on as usual, the same polished marble floors, the same soft jazz drifting from the speakers, and the same quiet elegance that had always defined the restaurant. But something had changed. The waitstaff smiled more. Patrons said thank you more often. The place no longer carried the invisible wall that separated those who served from those who were served. It felt warmer, more human. And if you asked anyone, they would trace the change back to one night, the night the billionaire forgot his card. Martha had long since tucked the memory away like a pressed flower, fragile, beautiful but no longer heavy. She still worked her double shifts, still sent money to Lily at college, still brewed her coffee the same way every morning. But every now and then, when the light hit the chandelier just right, she felt the ghost of that silence wash over her again, the moment when kindness had stilled an empire. That evening she was polishing glasses when the matron approached with an odd smile. "Table 12 requested you specifically," he said. "I told them you don't usually serve that section anymore, but they insisted." She looked up, already guessing. Sure enough, when she turned, there he was, Lawrence Vane, sitting alone, wearing a simple gray sweater instead of a suit. He looked older, softer somehow, like a man who had finally learned to rest. "Good evening, Mr. Vane," she said as she approached. He smiled. "It's just Lawrence today." He stood, pulling out a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. "I brought something for you," he said, "and before you refuse, it's not money. I've learned better." Martha chuckled, wiping her hands on her apron. "You learn fast for a slow starter." He laughed quietly, then pushed the box toward her. Inside was a framed photo, a black and white still of the restaurant's chandelier taken from beneath, each crystal catching the light like frozen tears. Below it, a simple inscription. The night, everything paused. It's beautiful," she said softly, tracing the frame's edge with her thumb. "You taught me that silence can be the loudest thing in a room," Lawrence said. "I've been trying to listen ever since." For a while, neither spoke. The restaurant around them pulsed with gentle movement, waiters crossing paths, silverware clinking, conversations rising and fading like waves. Lawrence watched her work with the same quiet attention as before, but this time without pride or curiosity. It was something else now, respect. When the evening rush began, he ordered the same espresso as before. As she placed it on his table, he looked up. "You ever think about stopping? Retiring, I mean." Martha smiled wistfully. "Sometimes, but what would I do then? Sit still? I've spent my life moving. Maybe that's all I know." "Then let me make it easier when you decide you've had enough," he said. The Foundation's board approved something called the Martinez Fellowship. It's for hospitality workers, families, scholarships, health care, career training. It was your idea, even if you never meant to share it. Her throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted gently, "because you showed me that wealth without purpose is just noise." For the first time, she saw not the billionaire from headlines, but a man trying to do right clumsily, earnestly, like a child learning to walk. Later, as he left, Lawrence paused at the door. "You once told me that kindness remembers," he said. "I wanted you to know I haven't forgotten." After he was gone, Martha stood for a long moment, her reflection shimmering in the mirror behind the bar. The room felt quieter again, but not with tension, with peace. She ran her fingers over the photo he'd given her, her smile faint but full. That night, as she closed up, she stepped outside to find the city washed clean by rain. The streets glistened under the lamplight, and a warm breeze brushed against her face. She looked up at the skyline, at the thousands of glowing windows where stories like hers were unfolding, unseen stories of small decencies, quiet rebellions, and unmeasured grace. Her phone buzzed a message from Lily. "Got the acceptance letter?" Columbia said yes. Martha's breath caught. She laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the wet pavement. "Columbia," she murmured. "That's where everything began." She started walking toward the subway, her reflection following her in the puddles haloed by the city's lights. In her bag, the photograph shifted slightly, catching a beam of streetlight across the words, "The night everything paused." As the train roared beneath the city, she thought about how strange it was that one act, one choice, made in a single heartbeat could ripple so far beyond its moment. She thought of Lawrence in his penthouse, perhaps sitting by the window, remembering the weight of a simple phrase, "Kindness has no credit limit." The world outside blurred past neon signs, laughter, the rhythm of life continuing. Martha closed her eyes and smiled. She had not changed the world, she had simply reminded it to feel again. And somewhere between the rumble of steel and the hum of rain, she whispered the truth that had carried her through everything, a truth she hoped would outlive them both. In the end, money measures what we have, but kindness measures who we are. Summer settled over New York in a haze of heat and golden dust. The Langford room glowed beneath its chandeliers as always, but now the air carried something lighter: conversation, laughter, and music that seemed less like background and more like heartbeat. Martha still worked her shifts, though the manager had tried several times to persuade her to retire. "You've done enough," he told her. "You deserve to rest." But rest, to Martha, had never been the same as peace. She found peace in motion, in the rhythm of pouring wine, folding napkins, and listening to the clink of glass echo softly against marble. One Friday evening, a familiar voice startled her. "You still move like time doesn't dare touch you." She turned to find Lawrence standing at the bar. He looked almost unrecognizable without his usual sharpness. His sleeves were rolled up, his expression open. "I had a board meeting nearby," he said, smiling awkwardly. "Figured I'd stop in before the world devoured me again." Martha chuckled. "And here I thought billionaires didn't eat with the common folk. I'm trying to unlearn a few bad habits." He took a seat. "Coffee, please. You know how I take it." She poured without asking, sliding the cup toward him. For a moment they were quiet. The pianist played something slow and honey-colored. The city outside hummed like a living thing. "I read about the fellowship," she said finally. "People are calling it a lifeline. Single parents, veterans, students, it's doing real good." He nodded, stirring his coffee, though he didn't need to. "It's not mine," he said. "It's yours. I just signed the checks." She smiled. "Then I suppose we're even. You funded it. I started it by accident." He looked up. "Accidents are just miracles in disguise." They talked for nearly an hour about Lily, who had started her first semester at Columbia, about how the city never really slept, only shifted dreams, about how strange it felt to grow older but softer at the same time. When Lawrence left, he pressed a small card into her hand. "An invitation," he said. "It's not another test, I promise." The next week, she stood outside a gleaming new community center on the Lower East Side. A banner stretched across the entrance, "The Martinez Center for Opportunity." She stared at her own name, printed in elegant black letters, and shook her head in disbelief. Reporters were everywhere, snapping photos, asking questions she didn't quite hear. Lawrence appeared beside her, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who'd finally found his purpose. "I wanted it to be a surprise," he said. "You once told me that kindness ripples. I figured we should give it a home." Inside, the center buzzed with life workshops, scholarship programs, and a small cafe run by single mothers getting back on their feet. Martha wandered through the rooms, her eyes wide. Every corner smelled of new paint and possibility. In one hallway, she stopped in front of a framed quote mounted on the wall. "Kindness has no credit limit." "Monsieur Martinez?" Her eyes stung. "You didn't have to put my name on it." "I did," Lawrence replied. Because people need to see that the richest moment I ever had came from someone who never cared about wealth at all. They stood together, watching volunteers hang art from local students. For a brief second, Martha thought of her late husband, his quiet patience, the way he'd once told her that grace was the only thing worth spending freely. She felt him there somehow, woven into the air. As the speeches began, Lawrence took the microphone and gestured toward her. "There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after," he said. "For me, it was one night in a restaurant when a woman decided that dignity mattered more than pride. She bought me dinner that night. I'm still paying for it." The crowd laughed softly, then applauded. Cameras flashed. Martha blushed and ducked her head, but her smile was radiant. When the event ended, she stepped outside, letting the evening wind lift her hair. The sky had turned lavender, and the city lights blinked to life one by one. Lawrence joined her on the steps. "Do you ever regret not walking away that night?" he asked. She thought for a long moment before answering. "No," she said. "If I'd walked away, maybe nothing would have changed. But by staying calm, I reminded myself what I stood for. That's what people forget. Kindness doesn't mean weakness. It's strength with a steady pulse." "I prant." He nodded, looking out over the street where a group of children chased one another through puddles of reflected neon. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think power meant control. Now I think it means capacity. The capacity to do good or to do harm. You showed me which one lasts." As the crowd dispersed, Martha began to walk home. Her steps were slow but sure, her heart steady. Behind her, the lights of the new center glowed like a beacon in the dusk. She knew her story would fade from the news soon enough. Another fleeting headline in a restless world. But the ripple would remain. She stopped at a crosswalk and looked up at the skyscrapers. Their glass faces reflected the last pink hues of sunset. Somewhere, people were still chasing wealth, still forgetting that generosity had no price tag. Martha smiled gently. She had been poor, and now she was comfortable, but she understood something more enduring. She had never been without worth. When she reached her apartment, she set the framed photograph from Lawrence on her windowsill. The chandelier in the picture gleamed faintly under the streetlight outside. She poured herself a cup of tea and watched the city breathe. The next morning, Lily called. "Grandma, they mentioned you in my ethics class today," she said, laughing. "My professor said your story was proof that morality can't be bought." Martha chuckled softly. "Tell him to add that kindness pays dividends." "I do." After the call ended, she looked once more at the photograph, the frozen lights, the stillness, the moment when time itself had bowed to grace. She whispered, not to anyone in particular, all that from one forgotten card. And outside, as if the world had heard her, a car horn sounded, a door slammed, and life went on messy, imperfect, and endlessly redeemable. Autumn arrived like a sigh. The air grew thinner, and the leaves along Central Park turned to rust and gold. Martha loved this season, most not for its beauty, but for its mercy. Autumn never rushed you. It let things end gently. Each morning she walked the few blocks from her apartment to the Langford room, though she no longer needed to. The manager had long since offered her a lifetime pension, courtesy of the Vane Foundation. She could have retired to somewhere quiet, somewhere warm. But routine was comfort and service was in her bones. The restaurant had become less of a workplace and more of a chapel, a place where small gestures still mattered. The city outside was changing too. The Martinez Center had expanded, now sponsoring literacy programs and mentorships. Martha received letters from people she had never met: waiters in Chicago, single mothers in Dallas, students in Boston, all thanking her for proving that kindness could stand up to power. She kept every letter folded in a tin box under her bed, rereading them on nights when the city felt too loud. One evening, as she wiped down the last table, she noticed a familiar figure at the doorway. Lawrence stood there, framed by the amber light, a small smile on his face. He looked thinner, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was a calmness about him she hadn't seen before. "You're late for dinner," she said with a teasing smile. "I'm early for goodbyes," he replied. Her hands froze mid-polish. "Goodbyes?" He stepped closer. "The doctor's found something," he said gently. "Nothing dramatic, just time reminding me who's really in charge." Martha felt the air tighten around them. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be," he answered. "It's strange I've spent a lifetime acquiring everything except peace. And then, one night, a waitress handed me a receipt with 7 words that rewrote my life. Arrogance." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper, folded and refolded until the ink had begun to fade. It was the same receipt. "Kindness has no credit limit." "I keep it with me," he said. "It reminds me not to measure days by profit but by grace." She swallowed hard. "You've done more than enough with your grace, Lawrence." "Not yet," he said. "There's one more thing I wanted to ask." He looked almost shy now, an unfamiliar vulnerability softening his tone. "Would you speak at the Foundation Gala next month? They're dedicating a new wing in your name. I'd like people to hear the truth from you, not the story, the headline sold, but the real thing." Martha hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her world. Silence had always been her language. But seeing him there, once untouchable, now fragile and human, she nodded. "I'll do it. For both of us." The night of the gala arrived cold and crystalline. The ballroom was filled with people dressed in black and gold, the air humming with quiet reverence. Cameras flashed, and crystal glasses clinked. But when Martha stepped up to the microphone, the room fell utterly still. She looked out over the crowd, bankers, politicians, artists, servers, all faces reflecting the same curiosity. She began simply, "Years ago, a man forgot his card," she said. But really, what he forgot was something we all forget, that worth isn't what's printed on a statement. It's what survives when the balance drops to zero. The audience leaned closer, drawn into her calm cadence. That night wasn't about a test or a spectacle. It was about remembering. He remembered who he could be, and I remembered that kindness still has a place in a world that moves too fast to notice it. A soft murmur rippled through the room. Martha glanced toward the front row where Lawrence sat, pale but smiling faintly. Their eyes met no power, no status, just gratitude shared between two people who had saved each other in different ways. "I'm not extraordinary," she continued. "I just refuse to be unkind. And maybe that's enough." Applause swelled, gentle at first, then rising into something powerful, unrestrained. People stood, not for spectacle, but for reverence. Lawrence rose too, clapping slowly, his gaze never leaving her. For a moment it felt as if the world had stopped again, a second frozen tableau, this time made not of silence but of grace. Afterward they sat together on the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered like a river of stars, and the night breeze carried the faint scent of rain. Lawrence looked tired but content. "You gave them hope tonight," he said quietly. "They already had it," she replied. "I just reminded them to look." He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "You always make it sound so simple." "It is simple," she said. "That's what makes it hard." They sat without speaking for a while. Down below, taxis traced ribbons of light through the streets. Finally, Lawrence turned to her. "Promise me you'll keep it going. The center, the scholarships, the kindness. Promise me it won't end with me." Martha placed her hand over his. "It didn't start with you either. It started with a choice. And choices don't die." He nodded, eyes glistening in the city's glow. "Then we did something right." Weeks later, when the leaves had all fallen and the first snow began to drift over the city, Martha received another envelope. Inside was a simple note, written in Lawrence's familiar hand. "When the card runs out, the heart keeps giving. M." Below it was his signature, and beneath that the deed transferring the Langford room to its employees to be run as a cooperative. Martha stood by the window, snow swirling beyond the glass, and let the tears come. The chandelier in the restaurant below still gleamed, scattering light across the floor like pieces of a memory. She thought of all the people who would walk through those doors, unaware that a simple act of decency had built the ground beneath them. Outside, the city pulsed on vast, indifferent, but alive with small kindnesses that no ledger could track. Martha smiled through the blur of her reflection and whispered, "Still no limit." And somewhere, far above the city lights, a man who had once measured the world in billions finally rested in peace, leaving behind a fortune that could never be counted because it was made of grace. Winter fell quietly that year. The city softened under layers of snow, its noise muffled into a steady hush. From her apartment window, Martha watched the world blur into white. Down below, the awning of the Langford room shimmered with frost, and the golden glow of its chandeliers spilled onto the street like a heartbeat against the cold. It had been 3 months since Lawrence's passing. His memorial had filled the Martinez Center to capacity. Executives sat beside waiters, lawyers beside line cooks, each of them sharing stories not about his business deals but about his apologies. For once, his name had been spoken not as currency but as redemption. Martha still came to work most evenings, though her title had changed. She was no longer waitress. The brass nameplate on her locker now read house mentor. It had been Lawrence's last directive, scribbled in his will. "Let her stay where she taught me everything." The restaurant was employee-owned now, and it flourished in ways money could never predict. Tips were pooled, decisions were shared, and once a month the staff closed early to serve free meals to the homeless shelter across the street. The same marble floors that once echoed with quiet competition now rang with laughter. That evening, Martha moved through the dining room with her usual grace. A young waitress named June struggled with a tray of champagne flutes, her hands shaking. Martha slipped beside her, steadying the tray before it tipped. "Easy," she murmured. "You're not serving kings, just people with napkins." June laughed nervously. "They still scare me." "They scared me too," Martha said, until one of them forgot his card. The girl smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. "You really think small acts matter that much?" Martha nodded. "Small acts are the only ones that ever last." Later, when the final guests left, she sat near the window with a cup of coffee. The chandelier above her, once the symbol of opulence, now flickered gently like a companion. She could almost hear Lawrence's voice teasing her. "You're still here?" "Yes," she whispered to the empty air. "Still here." Outside, the snow thickened, swirling around the lampposts in a slow dance. She thought about Lily, now in her second year at Columbia, studying ethics and social policy. Every Sunday they talked on the phone about her classes, her professors, her growing conviction that the world could in fact be changed by kindness. "You were right, Grandma," Lily had said the week before. "Grace has gravity. It pulls people toward better." Martha smiled at the memory. Maybe that was all legacy, really, was a gentle pull in the right direction. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Caleb, now head waiter, holding an envelope. "This came for you?" he said. The handwriting was elegant, familiar. Inside was a photograph, a group of smiling students standing under the sign Martinez Fellowship Class of 2028. On the back, a single line. "Every act adds up. L." She traced the letter with her fingertip, the ink faint but alive. "You never really left, did you?" she murmured. The next morning, the restaurant opened early for a private brunch, a group of retired service workers sponsored by the foundation. As Martha greeted them, she felt the air hum with warmth despite the cold outside. One of the guests, an elderly man with tired eyes, clasped her hands. "You're the waitress from the story," he said. "The one who paid for the billionaire's coffee." "I suppose I am," she said with a gentle laugh. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You're the woman who reminded us we matter." After the brunch, Martha stood at the window watching them leave, their laughter rising like steam against the chill. A few of the younger staff joined her, arms folded, eyes soft. "You think he'd be proud?" June asked. "He'd say we're still in debt," Martha replied. "But the good kind, the kind that keeps us giving." That night, after closing, she walked through the empty dining room one last time. She paused beneath the chandelier, gazing up at the crystals that caught the faint light like tiny suns. It had become a ritual, her quiet communion with memory. She reached into her apron and unfolded a piece of paper she carried every day. The same receipt, its corners worn smooth from time. The ink was barely visible now, but she didn't need to read the words. They lived inside her. She whispered to the silence. Kindness has no credit limit. The room seemed to breathe with her. The air stirred slightly, the way it does when someone unseen walks past. She could almost imagine Lawrence standing nearby, amused, grateful, finally at peace. Before locking up, she left the receipt under the glass counter, pressed flat between two panels like a relic. On it, she placed a note for the staff. When you forget why you're here, read this. Then go serve someone who can't repay you. Oh? The next day when she returned, a new note had been added beside hers in bright blue ink. Already did. Martha laughed softly, the sound mingling with the faint clatter of breakfast dishes and the city waking up beyond the door. Life had become an endless loop of giving and returning, of remembering and forgetting, of debt and grace. Years later, when she finally chose to retire, the restaurant held a small gathering in her honor. No speeches, no champagne, just candles, quiet music, and the familiar faces of those she had guided. They presented her with a framed photo, the chandelier again, glowing above a crowded dining room. Beneath it, engraved in silver, were her words. Every card has a limit, only character doesn't. She stood in the doorway for a long while after everyone had gone, her hand resting on the frame. The street outside was silver with moonlight. She didn't feel sad. She felt complete. When she stepped into the cold, a breeze lifted the ends of her scarf. Across the street, the lights of the Martinez Center gleamed. Inside, people were still eating, learning, living. Her story had long since stopped belonging to her. It belonged to them now, to everyone who believed decency could still win. As she walked away, the city's hum rose behind her, alive with motion. Somewhere, a doorbell rang, a child laughed, a stranger held another's hand. And through it all, quiet but constant, the ripple continued proof that in a world built on limits, one woman's grace had become infinite. The years rolled forward like soft waves, and Martha's story slowly became legend. Newspapers moved on, cameras dimmed, and younger faces filled the dining room she once ruled with quiet grace. Yet her name lingered not in headlines, but in habits. Waiters still greeted guests with calm warmth. Managers still ended every meeting with the phrase she'd made famous, "Remember, we serve people, not plates." Martha herself had retired to a small cottage near the Hudson River, a place where mornings smelled of dew and pine, and the sound of water replaced the city's endless hum. Her knees no longer allowed long shifts, but her spirit remained as steady as ever. She spent her days tending a tiny garden, reading and writing letters to Lily, now Dr. Lily Martinez, professor of social ethics at Columbia. One brisk morning, Martha sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea from a chipped porcelain cup. The sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, glinting off the photograph of the chandelier that Lawrence had once given her. The edges were fading now, but the words beneath, "The night everything paused," were as clear as ever. She ran her fingers across the frame and whispered, "Still shining, aren't you?" Her thoughts wandered to the restaurant she had left behind. She imagined the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the music that had once carried her through exhaustion and heartbreak alike. She wondered if the new staff still felt the same quiet reverence for their work, the same sacred rhythm she'd always known. Just then, the doorbell rang. She moved slowly, cane in hand, and opened the door to find a young woman holding a bouquet of lilies. Her smile was bright, familiar somehow. "Mrs. Martinez?" Martha nodded, surprised. "I'm sorry to drop in unannounced. My name's June Patel. I used to work under you at the Langford Room." Recognition dawned. "The one with trembling hands and too much courage," Martha said fondly. "I remember." June laughed. "Still trembling, but I'm managing." She stepped inside, placing the flowers on the table. "I wanted to thank you. I'm managing the restaurant now. We've expanded to 2 more locations, all under the employee cooperative model. It's working better than anyone expected." Martha's eyes sparkled. "So the family grew." "It did," June said. "And we started something else. The Vane Martinez Initiative. Every December, we host free dinners for anyone who walks in. No questions, no bills. We call it the Night Without Cards. The words caught Martha by surprise. The night without cards. She smiled slowly, deeply. "He would have loved that," she whispered. June nodded. "We think so too. His foundation still helps fund it. And Lily, your granddaughter, she's on our advisory board now. She gives talks about empathy and moral courage. She always starts with your story." Martha looked down, embarrassed but touched. "My story's old, dear. The world needs new ones now." June shook her head. "Your story built the bridge we're all walking across." They talked for hours, sharing updates, laughter, and quiet memories. Before leaving, June placed a small box on the table. "We had this made for you," she said. Inside lay a silver medallion engraved with two simple phrases. "Kindness has no credit limit on one side, and every card has a limit. Only character doesn't, on the other." Martha ran her thumb over the smooth metal. "It feels heavy." "It's supposed to," June said softly. "It carries a lot of lives." After she left, Martha sat by the window, watching the river glisten under the late afternoon Sunday. She thought of how one forgotten card had spun a thread that connected strangers, changed systems, built scholarships, and reshaped the meaning of wealth itself. She thought of Lawrence, gone but never absent, and wondered if he knew how far the ripple had reached. As dusk fell, she took out her worn receipt, the one she'd carried for decades. The ink was almost invisible now, but she didn't need the words to see them. She placed it beside the medallion and smiled. Later that night, she wrote a letter to Lily. "My dearest Lily, the world is faster now. People trade truth for speed and compassion for applause. But remember this: the most lasting revolutions begin quietly in moments when no one is watching. When you choose to do the right thing simply because it's right. The richest people I've met were not the ones who owned the chandeliers, but the ones who carried light wherever they went. Keep carrying it, sweetheart. And when it feels heavy, that's how you know it's real. Love, Grandma." She sealed the letter, placed it on her nightstand, and looked once more at the framed photograph. The chandelier gleamed faintly, as though aware of its own legend. A week later, the first snow of the season arrived. Martha wrapped herself in a thick shawl and stepped outside. The world was hushed, as if holding its breath. She walked to the edge of her small garden, where the ground met the riverbank. There, beneath the frosted branches, she placed the medallion in the soil and covered it gently with her hands. "Keep glowing," she whispered. "Keep spreading." When she straightened, the cold air bit her cheeks, but her eyes shone with a quiet pride. She had given everything she had, and somehow it had multiplied beyond her reach. That night, as she drifted to sleep, her dreams were filled with light chandeliers, reflections, ripples of water turning into stars. And somewhere between waking and memory, she heard a familiar voice murmur with calm certainty, "Still no limit, Martha. Still no limit." In the morning, the snow lay untouched outside her window, and a single beam of sunlight cut through the clouds, landing on the frame of the photograph. It shimmered softly, alive again. The world went on fast, loud, complicated, but somewhere in a quiet cottage by the Hudson, Grace remained, not as a headline, not as history, but as proof. Proof that a small act, born of decency and courage, could echo across years, cross boundaries, and outlast even time itself. Spring came gently to the Hudson, soft as forgiveness. The snow receded in silver ribbons, the river thawed, and sunlight returned with the kind of gold that made everything seem a little new again. Martha sat on her porch, wrapped in a shawl that smelled faintly of lavender, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The world around her was still, yet alive, the kind of silence that hums with meaning. Lily arrived that afternoon, her hair tied back, a satchel full of papers and stories slung over her shoulder. She looked older now, not in years but in wisdom. There was the same calm steadiness in her gaze that Martha once saw in her own reflection decades ago. "Grandma," she said with a bright smile, "the university wants to name a lecture series after you." Martha blinked. "After me? For what? I only served coffee and common sense. Lily laughed. That's exactly why. The series will focus on ethical leadership, the power of humility, empathy, and what they call the moral ripple effect. The moral ripple effect, Martha repeated, tasting the phrase. Sounds fancier than it feels. Maybe, Lily said, setting her satchel down, but it's real. Your story is part of the curriculum now, Grandma. Every student in my program studies The Night Without Cards as a case study in applied ethics. Martha chuckled softly. Imagine that. I just didn't want a man to embarrass himself further. Lily took her hand, her voice tender. You did more than that. You proved that compassion doesn't need an audience. The afternoon stretched into a quiet rhythm birdsong. Wind in the trees, the soft murmur of water against stone. Martha listened to Lily talk about her students, her research, her dream to expand the Martinez Center model to other cities. Each word filled the air with promise, and Martha felt something she hadn't in years, the assurance that what she'd built would outlive her. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, Lily reached into her bag. There's something else, she said, pulling out a thin, leather-bound book. It's a collection of letters and notes from people whose lives you've touched through the fellowship, the restaurant, the foundation. We're publishing it through the center. Oh. Martha took the book carefully, tracing the embossed title with her fingers. Still No Limit, Stories of Grace. She opened the first page and found a photo of her standing beneath the chandelier, smiling faintly. Below it, a handwritten dedication read, For the woman who reminded us that kindness is the only currency that never loses value. Her eyes blurred. You're turning my life into homework, she joked weakly, but her voice trembled. Lily smiled through her own tears. Maybe, but it's homework that changes people. That night, after Lily left, Martha stayed up late reading the letters. Some came from strangers, a man who'd left Wall Street to teach, a single mother who'd opened a bakery using a fellowship grant, a teenager who'd written, Because of you, I stopped apologizing for being kind. Each letter was a fragment of light, and together they formed a constellation of everything she'd ever believed in. When she finished, she closed the book and pressed it against her chest. The silence in the room felt sacred. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of church bells from across the river. Martha stood slowly, her joints aching, and walked to the window. The reflection staring back at her was older, softer, but her eyes still burned with the same quiet fire that had once silenced a billionaire. She whispered to the night, We did it, Lawrence. We turned a test into a testament. A week later, the local community gathered at the Martinez Center to celebrate its 10th anniversary. Martha hadn't planned to attend. Her health had been fragile lately, but Lily insisted. It's your legacy, Grandma, she said. You should see what you started. The hall was full when they arrived. Banners hung from the ceiling with words that had long outgrown their origin. Grace, dignity, no limits. Volunteers bustled around serving meals, laughter filled the air, and somewhere a pianist played the same jazz tune that had once echoed through the Langford room. As Martha stepped inside, people turned not out of recognition, but out of reverence. Strangers approached with soft smiles, some shaking her hand, others simply saying thank you. She moved slowly, leaning on her cane, her heart full and trembling. At the front of the room, a plaque was unveiled. It bore her name, and beneath it, a quote etched in bronze. One forgotten card changed everything, not because of what was lost, but because of what was remembered. The applause was gentle, respectful. Martha looked around at the faces, young, old, rich, poor, all sharing the same light. For a moment, she closed her eyes, and the years folded back. The marble floor, the black card, the silence that had once swallowed a room. She could almost feel it again, that perfect, suspended moment when dignity had outweighed power. After the ceremony, Lily helped her back outside. The evening air was cool and fragrant with blooming lilacs. Across the street, the windows of the center glowed warmly. Martha took one last look, then turned to her granddaughter. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything." When I'm gone, don't let them make this story about wealth or guilt or miracles. Let it stay small. Let it stay human. M. Lily nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. I promise. Martha smiled, tired but content. Good. That's how kindness works best. Quiet enough to be missed, but strong enough to be remembered. That night, as the car carried them home along the darkened river, Martha leaned her head against the window. The city lights reflected in the water like 1,000 tiny chandeliers. She thought of all the people connected by invisible threads of grace, all ripples from one simple act. Her eyes fluttered closed, her breathing even. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the steady pulse of peace, the same peace that had followed her since that night long ago. The world outside moved fast, but within her, everything was still. Still glowing, still remembered, still no limit. The morning broke pale and quiet over the Hudson, the river a long stretch of silver glass. Martha awoke before dawn, as she always had, the habit of a lifetime that refused to leave even now. She sat at the edge of her bed, the room washed in the blue-gray light of early spring. For a moment she simply breathed, listening to the rhythm of her heart, slow, certain, unhurried. The photograph of the chandelier hung opposite her, its glass crystals forever frozen mid-glimmer. It had outlasted so many things, the restaurant, the cameras, even the man who had given it to her. Yet it still seemed to glow with quiet memory. She smiled at it, murmuring, "You've done well keeping the light." A faint knock sounded at her door. It was Lily, carrying breakfast and a letter. "Morning, Grandma," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" Martha laughed. "Old but not useless. The day I stop complaining, you'll know I'm gone." They ate together oatmeal, coffee, and sliced oranges. Outside, birds trilled, fearless of the coming day. When they finished, Lily handed her the envelope. "From the center," she said. "They're opening a new branch in Chicago. They wanted you to see the dedication message before it goes up." Martha unfolded the letter slowly. The words were simple, printed in black ink. This place was built not from charity, but from choice, the choice to believe that kindness is currency enough. In honor of Martha Martinez, her throat tightened. "Choice," she whispered. "That's the word I've been chasing my whole life." Lily nodded, tears threatening her composure. "You didn't just make a choice that night, Grandma. You made it every day after to stay kind when it would have been easier not to." The morning drifted on. After Lily left for the center, Martha sat by the window, writing in her journal. The pages were filled with thoughts, small observations, and fragments of gratitude. The smell of rain, the sound of laughter in a restaurant, the warmth of a stranger's "thank you." She wrote for hours until the sunlight shifted and shadows began to stretch across the floor. In the late afternoon, she bundled herself in a light shawl and stepped outside. The air carried the scent of river moss and lilacs. Each step down the path to her garden felt heavier than before, but she didn't mind. Her knees ached, her breath shortened, but her heart was calm, the kind of calm that only comes after a life spent in alignment with its own values. She reached the small patch of earth where she had buried the silver medallion months before. The soil was soft now, and tiny sprouts had begun to push through. She crouched down slowly, brushing her fingertips across the green tips. "Still growing," she murmured, and her voice trembled with pride. A light wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the sound of distant bells. For a fleeting moment, Martha closed her eyes, and the world seemed to fold in on itself. She could hear the faint echo of piano notes, the same melody that had played the night everything changed. She could see the restaurant's marble floors, the shock in Lawrence's eyes, the steady calm in her own. When she opened her eyes again, she wasn't in the past, not really, but it felt close enough to touch. That evening, Lily returned to find her grandmother dozing in her favorite chair on the porch, the journal open in her lap. The last line written read, "Every ripple becomes a tide when love is consistent." Lily sat beside her, holding her hand. The pulse was faint but steady. Martha stirred, her voice little more than a whisper. "Did you see the sky tonight?" Lily looked up. The sunset stretched in streaks of rose and amber, the river below reflecting every shade. "It's beautiful." Martha smiled faintly. "It's the same color as the chandelier light, don't you think?" They sat together in silence, watching the last of the daylight fade. Martha's breathing grew slower, more rhythmic, until it matched the soft rustle of the wind through the garden. When the first star appeared, she spoke again, her words thin as breath. "Promise me something." "Anything," Lily said. "When people ask what I did, don't tell them I changed a man's life. Tell them I remembered my own worth and made it contagious." Lily squeezed her hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I promise." Martha's gaze lingered on the horizon, her eyes bright even as they dimmed. "Good," she whispered. "Then we're even." The evening deepened into twilight, the air cool and still. When Lily finally stood to fetch a blanket, Martha's head had tilted slightly to the side, her features serene, her lips curved into the faintest smile. The last of the sun caught the corner of the photograph inside the house, making it shimmer one final glint of gold before night fell. Days later, the city gathered again at the center, at the restaurant, across countless homes that bore the echo of her kindness. The world didn't stop. It bowed, quietly, collectively. The lights of the Langford room were dimmed for a minute of silence, and every waiter in every branch of the Foundation's restaurants paused mid-shift, hands resting gently on trays, remembering the woman who had taught them that dignity could be service, and service could be divine. Lily stood at the front of the crowd during the memorial, reading her grandmother's final words. "Kindness is not an act but a posture, a way of standing before the world without armor, and daring to stay open." When she finished, the pianist began to play the same melody that had once filled a quiet restaurant where a billionaire's arrogance met a waitress's grace. And in that moment, under chandeliers that glowed like captured sunlight, people smiled through tears. Somewhere they could almost hear Martha's gentle voice, warm as ever, echoing through memory and time. "Every card has a limit. Only character doesn't." Outside, the wind carried the sound of laughter, the clinking of glasses, the rustle of ordinary life, proof that her legacy was not a monument but a movement, one that would continue wherever decency met courage. And as night settled over the Hudson, the river caught the reflection of the stars, turning them into tiny chandeliers, countless lights, each one a ripple of the woman who had never stopped believing that kindness could outshine power. A full year passed after Martha's memorial, and the world did what it always does: it kept moving. Seasons turned, buildings rose, names faded from headlines. Yet in quiet corners of the city, her presence lingered like the faint echo of a song that refuses to end. At the Langford room, the chandelier still hung in its rightful place, polished every morning until its crystals winked like small suns. Beneath it, diners came and went, unaware that they sat under a relic of redemption. The staff, however, remembered. Every evening before the first guests arrived, they gathered for 30 seconds of silence. Not prayer, not routine, just silence, the kind that steadied their hearts. They called it the pause. June, now the general manager, had turned the restaurant into a living philosophy. Each new hire learned the story on their first day, not from videos or plaques, but from her voice, soft but firm. "We don't serve for tips. We serve to remind people that kindness tastes better." The receipts at the Langford room still bore Martha's words in fine print. Kindness has no credit limit. Across the country, the Martinez Center continued to grow branches in Chicago, Atlanta, Denver, and Seattle. Each one carried the same golden emblem, a pair of open hands encircling a simple phrase, "Grace over gold." Under its programs, thousands of families found stability. Students received scholarships, and small acts of compassion turned into systems of change. Lily had taken the Foundation's leadership, balancing her academic work with the legacy of her grandmother. She moved between cities, giving lectures, visiting new centers, meeting with policymakers, but no matter how far she traveled, she always carried a folded piece of paper in her wallet, the the copy of the old receipt Martha had once kept in her apron. One evening, as she prepared for a keynote speech at Columbia, she stood alone in an empty auditorium. The stage lights glowed faintly, washing the wooden floor in amber. She unfolded the paper, tracing the faded words. A smile tugged at her lips. "You're still here," she whispered. When the audience filled the hall an hour later, Lily stepped up to the podium. The room quieted. Hundreds of faces turned toward her. She began not with statistics or achievements, but with a story, the one she had heard since childhood. "My grandmother was a waitress," she said simply. "And one night, she paid for a billionaire's meal with her own card. It wasn't a grand gesture or a moral lesson. It was instinct, a reflex of dignity. That one choice didn't just change a man's heart, it created a culture." The audience leaned forward, the kind of silence that breathes, expectant and alive. "She used to say, 'Kindness is not a strategy, it's a stance.' I believe that's what leadership should be. Not dominance, not control, but grace under pressure." A ripple of applause broke the stillness, soft at first, then building. Lily paused, letting the sound wash through her. "We built the Martinez Centers on that foundation. But tonight, I want to remind you the story didn't start with a billionaire or a headline. It started with someone ordinary choosing to stay kind when humiliation would have been easier." After the speech, people lined up to shake her hand, students, executives, retirees. Some shared their own stories of quiet resistance, of choosing decency in moments that didn't seem to matter. And Lily realized that her grandmother's words had become something more than a legacy. They had become a language people spoke when words like profit and success fell short. Later that night, she visited the original Martinez Center on the Lower East Side. The lights inside glowed soft and golden, illuminating the community dinner in full swing. Volunteers ladled soup, children laughed, the scent of bread filled the air. At the center of the room stood a new mural, a painted chandelier shimmering over the words, "Every card has a limit, only character doesn't." Lily stood for a long time, just watching. A young boy noticed her and approached shyly. "Are you the lady from the stories?" he asked. "The one whose grandma bought dinner for the mean man?" She smiled. "That's her story, not mine. But I'm trying to live up to it." The boy grinned, clutching a dinner roll. "My mom says your grandma was like a superhero." Lily chuckled. She'd laugh if she heard that. She'd say, "Superheroes wear aprons, not capes." When the evening ended, Lily walked outside into the crisp night. The city shimmered around her taxis, gliding past puddles, windows glowing, laughter spilling from late-night diners. Above it all, the moon hung low, casting a light that reminded her of that same chandelier. She thought about how the story had traveled, from a single restaurant table to boardrooms, classrooms, kitchens, and hearts across the world. What began as an act of kindness had become an architecture of empathy, a structure built on grace rather than greed. As she crossed the street, her phone buzzed with a notification. A headline from a small-town paper read, "Local diner adopts no-card night, tradition to honor late waitress who inspired a movement." She stopped under a street lamp, tears catching in her eyes. "You see that, Grandma?" she whispered, still rippling. When she reached home, she placed the old receipt back in her journal, next to a photo of Martha smiling in her uniform. She turned off the lights, and for a brief second, the reflection in the window looked almost like her grandmother standing behind her, gentle, watchful, proud. "Good night," Lily said softly. Outside, the city hummed its endless lullaby, the same song of footsteps and traffic, laughter and labor. Yet beneath that noise, something quieter endured. The invisible rhythm of a promise kept, of kindness passing from one generation to the next. And somewhere, in every act of grace, in every person who paused to do good without reason, Martha's story lived on not as legend, but as muscle memory. A waitress had once changed the world by refusing to forget her humanity. Now, the world was remembering it, one small kindness at a time. Spring rain swept through the city like a gentle benediction, rinsing the streets clean, making everything shimmer with newness. The Langford room was quiet that evening, closed to the public for what the staff called the Night of Light, a private gathering held once a year in memory of the woman who had started it all. The chandeliers were dimmed, casting soft gold halos on the marble. Tables were empty except for candles, each flame flickering in rhythm with the rain tapping against the windows. June stood near the entrance, greeting each staff member as they arrived, all dressed in simple black uniforms, aprons tied neatly around their waists, the same way Martha had always insisted. Neat hands, open hearts. At the center of the room, a single framed photograph rested beneath the chandelier. Martha, smiling faintly, her hands folded around a tray. Below it, engraved in brass, were her words, "Kindness has no credit limit." When everyone had gathered, June lifted her glass. "She told us to keep it small," she said, her voice trembling. "So that's what we do. No cameras, no speeches, just gratitude." The staff raised their glasses in silence. Then, as was tradition, one person stepped forward to read from the Pause Journal, a book that lived permanently behind the counter, filled each year with stories of small kindnesses witnessed in the restaurant. Tonight, Caleb, the head waiter, opened it to a page near the end. He cleared his throat. "Last month," he began, "a man left without paying. Instead of calling security, a new waitress ran after him not to demand money, but to give him the wallet he'd dropped. The next day he came back, paid the bill twice, and left a note. You reminded me what decency feels like." Soft laughter rippled through the room, followed by quiet claps. June closed her eyes for a moment, the memory of Martha's voice drifting through her mind. "We're not here to earn tips. We're here to restore faith." Outside, thunder rolled distantly, and the rain intensified, streaking the windows with silver. Someone dimmed the lights further until only the chandelier's glow remained. The crystals refracted the candlelight into countless tiny sparks, dancing across the room like a constellation. June stepped closer to the photograph. "She used to say that every plate carried a story," she whispered, "but I think she was wrong." Her voice softened, trembling. "She didn't serve stories. She started them." One by one, the staff began to leave candles beneath the frame. By the time the last flame was set down, the room looked as though it were floating in stars. Later that night, after everyone had gone, June remained alone to close up. She turned off the last light, but the chandelier still caught the faint reflection of the city outside, the glow of taxis, the glimmer of wet pavement, the pulse of life continuing. She smiled. "Still shining," she said quietly. Across the city, Lily sat in her office at the Martinez Center, reviewing applications for the next fellowship class. On her desk rested the old medallion, its surface worn, but its message eternal. Every card has a limit. Only character doesn't. She reached out, tracing the words, then looked out the window toward the Hudson, where the water reflected the lights of the city like liquid glass. She thought of her grandmother, of the ripple that had started with one forgotten card and grown into a current that carried countless others toward hope. Somewhere, she imagined Martha walking through that same light apron tide, posture steady, smile calm, her presence woven into every act of grace that followed. A quiet peace settled over Lily. She whispered into the empty room, "We remembered, Grandma. We kept it human." Outside, the rain eased. The clouds parted just enough for a sliver of moonlight to fall over the city, catching the roof of the Langford room, the windows of the center, and the slow, shining curve of the river that had witnessed it all. And in that silver glow, the world seemed to pause once more, not in grandeur, but in gratitude for the woman who had proven that even the smallest kindness, offered without measure, could outlive everything that tried to forget it.